Go ahead, Ernesto.
Good evening, fellow inmates. I'm sorry that I can't be with you today, but I want to thank WBAI Rising and the Lynne Stewart organization for inviting me to participate in honoring the people's lawyer, Lynne Stewart. I consider myself to be very fortunate to be able to say that Lynne was a friend. On the morning that Lynne was arrested, Errol Maitland, one of the producers on Wake Up Call, was the first media on the scene with a microphone to document what had transpired. That used to happen a lot at WBAI. We were often the only media to document and investigate significant events in local communities ignored by corporate media. People in marginalized and oppressed communities saw us as being a part of their struggles and supported us when we asked for monetary support. Once that relationship was severed, WBAI's ability to maintain a staff and pay its bills became an impossibility. Lynne Stewart was the consummate legal warrior. She was willing to single-handedly take on one of the most powerful and inequitable social systems on the planet. Her weapons, a thorough knowledge of the law, and a love for humanity. Also, she was very, very lucky to have someone supportive like Ralph Poynter in her corner. As you know, Lynne served for a time as a director on WBAI's local station board. I have no doubt that if she was here today, she would be in the midst of the present struggle for the survival of WBAI. She recognized how important this institution is to local communities. I tried to imagine what Lynne might say if I were to interview her on this issue today. It would probably start with her saying something like this. Well, Bernard, this is what I think we should do. First, we have to determine what kind of institution we want to be. This way, we'll know what we're fighting for. We need to identify our present status economically and politically within Pacifica. In other words, who are our supporters and who are our opponents? What are our strengths and what are our weaknesses? Also, let's analyze the two major options on the table and take a protracted look at their probable outcomes. This one is a no-brainer. In the midst of one of the most tumultuous times in the history of this republic, WBAI can't raise any money. Historically, BAI always thrived during these periods. The Vietnam War, Iran-Contra, the illegal invasion of Iraq, wars against the people of Central America in this hemisphere, and anti-colonial struggles around the world. BAI was there trying to tell the real story. BAI was rewarded with support for the information it gathered and shared with its listeners. It also garnered a lot of support for its arts program. It's tragic and obvious that WBAI doesn't have that kind of support today, even as massive sums of money are being transferred from the poor to the pockets of the rich, while the legal system is reverting back to a more blatant form of Jim Crow, while young people by the millions are in the early stages of transforming American culture and standing up against neo-fascist movements throughout Europe. WBAI's phones are silent. It's obvious that over the last 10 years of the present leadership, the listener base has severely diminished. Then Lynne might say, you know, Bernard, I think that there are several things that must happen simultaneously if WBAI is going to survive. One of the most important and also the most difficult tasks is to educate and change the behavior and goals of the producers. Unfortunately, most of the producers are like today's Republican Party, who put party before country. Too many producers are more interested in securing a block of time on air for themselves than securing the life and vibrancy of the institution. At this particular moment in Pacifica and WBAI's history, the producers have a lot of unused potential power. If this continues to lay dormant, WBAI is doomed. Producers should by now be organized and outraged that a proposal that allows them to acquire the media tools to launch a stronger WBAI into the 21st century is competing with getting a loan to pay off outstanding debts with no realistic plan to increase revenue. Producers should be operating from a strategy laying out to the few listeners that are left, and for the community of listeners who no longer listen, and for a new generation of young listeners, exactly what's on the table and where each path will lead. In order for this to happen, a significant number is never going to be 100%, but a significant number of producers have to take the plan into our local neighborhoods and progressive organizations to get their support. I would then say, okay, Lynne, what's the plan? Lynne would probably say, I can't tell you what the plan is because it has to be developed by the producers and informed community supporters coming together as equals and developing a comprehensive war strategy. If this doesn't happen, Bernard, as I said, I'm afraid WBAI is doomed. And then I would say, before you go, Lynne, I want to thank you for all of the work you've done, and that I'm sorry that we couldn't protect you from the monster that you fought on our behalf. I want to thank you for putting humanity and justice before profit and being a positive role model for progressive lawyers. Thank you, Lynne. I'm sure those who are struggling around the WBAI issue can benefit from your analysis. We will always be the ones who determine who our heroes are, and you are definitely one of our heroes, and you won't be forgotten. Hope to talk to you soon. I'm aware that I didn't present Lynne as eloquently as Lynne would have done herself, but I'm sure that the message would have been the same. Come together as equal partners, determine what kind of institution you want WBAI to be, develop a theory of the case, and then take that theory to the people as you struggle against the reactionary forces within Pacifica and locally. If present leadership continues to be an obstacle, they must be removed. If not, WBAI, as a valuable asset for progressive forces, will be deeply buried in the dustbin of history. I hope that this little presentation is of some value. This is Bernard White saying, until next time, stay strong, pay close attention, and never give up.
Well, there's no one better to address what Mario is going to address, which is media options and the involvement of the youth. Now, Mario Murillo is professor of Communications and Latin American Studies at Hofstra University. He's a director of Public Affairs Programming. He's a host of Wake Up Call. He's the interim program director at WBAI. And he's much, much more over many, many years in so many struggles and actions, whether communications, yes, Latin America Studies, yes, and community radio, always.
I just want to thank WBAI Rising. Great name, great title for the organization, for the movement that's fighting for the rights to communicate in New York City. So I want to thank everybody involved with that. I think the work that is being done is great, although it's a really steep hill to climb. But I do want to especially salute Ralph, right? I had the pleasure of interviewing Lynne on several occasions when I was doing the morning show with Michael. Michael G's here somewhere. I don't see him in the lights. And always gracious, always serious, always funny too. Great sense of humor. And I was really I'm honored to say that I was the first, along with Michael, when we did the morning show. I think it was January of 2014 when Lynne was released. So in that time, I was doing my interim stint as interim program director for about 8 months at the station. We were doing the morning show, trying to do something with the morning show. And Lynne was released that morning, and they got in touch with us, and we had her on around 6:15 in the morning. And it was for me one of the most emotional interviews I had done in a long time, probably in all my years at BAI. But it was funny because at 8 o'clock when Democracy Now! Came on, Amy said, exclusive interview with Lynne Stewart. And I said, wait a minute, we just interviewed her about 2 hours ago. What's up with that? But that's cool. I love my Amy. I love my sister Amy. That's cool. But we did it first, right, Michael? All right. She showed, tremendous courage, right? Really walking alone on so many fronts, with everybody here and many others behind her, but definitely walking alone. An enlightening spirit, and I know how, and I can't say I know exactly what you're feeling, Ralph, but I could relate to what you're dealing with, because I lost my life partner, compañera, best friend, lover, comrade, about a little more than 2 years ago. And she was a firm supporter of BAI. She actually tried to advise me not to come back as interim program director. She was a lot wiser than I was. But when I could imagine what it is what you're going through, right? Because you lost your soulmate, right? But hopefully you rest easy knowing that her spirit, like Victoria's spirit, I think, in me and my family and a lot of the people that she touched, lives on, right? And I know she would want you to, and want us all to keep pushing on. So I salute you, my brother, and I think it's a long struggle, but you know that better than pretty much anybody in the room. But I do feel for you, because I know what that emptiness feels like. All right, Ralph. So let me just get quickly. In fact, Victoria was an optimist in many ways. She always used to push me to stay optimistic, as pessimistic as I would be under so many fronts, including when she was really ill. And I think we have to try to be optimistic despite the really, 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 really difficult situation facing Pacific and BAI that everybody's already outlined. And so this is what I'm going to try to elaborate on a little bit. I wrote an article, an essay actually. It was more of an academic paper. I was at a conference in July last year. It actually was held in Cartagena in Colombia, the International Association of Media and Communication Research. Yeah, it's like academic. A lot of activists are involved, like myself, but it's mostly academic. But I was in a panel about space, public space, and digital transformations. And so I wrote a piece about WBAI. I said, let me do that. The title is "The Digital versus the Physical: How the Virtual Revolution Bypassed the Community Radio Icon and Left It Without a Home." And then the subtitle, "A Personal Reflection on Pacifica's WBAI, or How Digital Killed a Community Radio Star." But and Rachel has a few copies if anybody wants to waste your time reading it. But it's really a lamentation as to what happened over the course of these last 15, 20 years or so, 15 years really of WBAI. And I start off talking about how it was in 1998, 20 years ago, when I stepped down as Public Affairs Programming Director. The station was at such a great stage. We had just moved into the new studios at WBAI at Wall Street. Again, some of us were concerned about moving there. We didn't think it was sustainable. I think we had Valerie's here, she was very much involved in that. And there was a lot of concerns about moving to Wall Street, even though it was a beautiful new space overlooking the East River, and we were in the heart of the belly of the beast. There was concern that wasn't sustainable. And in the long run, perhaps we were right, although it was a lot of other factors that tore us down, tore BAI down. But we were coming off that. I remember in February of that year, we had just finished our fourth $1 million fund drive in a row. And those fund drives back then, as you probably all remember, lasted 16, 17 days, not 28, 35, 40 days, right? And we had just, Democracy Now! Was already flourishing, so it was hitting national strides. Station producers were winning prizes all around the country, journalism awards, radio awards. The listenership, I think our membership base there was about 18,000, more or less. Again, Valerie could check that for me. And there was a lot of excitement. The thing that for me that makes BAI special is the space. This is what the paper's about. Is that as much as I'm a total advocate of transitioning to the digital world and doing things and not necessarily depending on the FM airwaves as much as a lot of other platforms that we now have, the physical space is what makes community radio. The physical space of having all sorts of different people together. Housing advocates, AIDS advocates, anti-racist people mobilizing, Latino immigrant advocates, and so on and so forth. Artists, academics, teachers, activists, old, young, etc. And that's what BAI was. It had a lot of warts, right? There was always internal battles. But there was something working at that time, and it was the physical space that made the station special. And I think if you look at community radio anywhere, and community media anywhere in the world, it's the physical space where people from different constituencies get together and merge and work and collaborate and build, notwithstanding the differences. I'm not under any false illusions that everybody's working together with their hands holding hands either. There's a lot of battles, a lot of fights. But that space is what makes community radio special. And BAI lost that space because of the myopia, really, of the leadership and of Pacifica. I would put the blame squarely on the Pacifica leadership. But so in this paper, I kind of elaborate on some of that, and all of the success that BAI was having right around the turn of the century, when the Christmas coup kicked in. That was right when the digital revolution was just beginning. You all remember the battle in Seattle, WTO. You'll remember what was happening then. I mean, it was indie media that started kind of changing the game, in which now suddenly everybody was producing content and putting it up there. And WBAI was somewhat involved. There was a number of us who were involved with that, and people from Democracy Now! Were involved, and Errol, and a lot of the people were involved in the morning show. But for the most part, the Pacifica Foundation, the Pacifica leadership were totally on the sidelines when this radical revolutionary technology was happening. And we were sitting in the sidelines kind of looking at our belly button and having these fights internally about how and who should run the operations. And then it got worse, right? Because then you started seeing, and so indie media, was kind of the pre-Facebook Facebook, right? And for activists and for people mobilizing all around the world, not only in the U.S., but all over the world. And Pacifica unfortunately missed it. And we didn't harness that potential at a time when precisely because they started going after us. Pacifica started going after WBAI, and that's when the coup took place. And to use academic language, the shit hit the fan, right? So I think we just have to look at that and say the discussions we're having now about MNN, we should have been having 15 to 20 years ago, right? Not now. But better late than never. So that's some of the stuff I talk about in the paper. The other thing I wanted to allude to, and I reference it in the paper, is my experience after being away. I took off from BA. I couldn't take it anymore, to be perfectly honest. For personal reasons, my wife's illness, all this other stuff, a lot of work that I was doing. And I just took away. And I don't mean to make it a personal thing, but I think it's important to reflect on that. But then I came back because I said, yeah, there's got to be something to be done, because I realized how dire the situation had become at BAI. And I credit so many of the people here being asked. I credit so many of the people who stuck it out, who I admit, I bailed on it for a while. But when I came back, I came with the spirit of, okay, let's see what we can do. And I realized that there was no physical space. We tried to bring in new people, Pam Brown, Christy Thornton, Jed Brown, a lot of folks that I tried to bring in, and we tried to have meetings together at the station, and there was like no space to meet, and it was uncomfortable. We don't even have a radio studio anymore. WBAI does not even have a radio studio, and it's been functioning like that for years. The people who run that station should be ashamed of themselves, right? And it was very disturbing to see that no matter what we tried to do, and part of that work that we were trying to do in that short 8-month period was to connect with BRIC and connect with MNN, right? I went to the MNN studios on several occasions, met with Dan and talked to some other people. I remember going up there and seeing about 10 young Puerto Rican and black video producers cutting their programs on Mac, iMacs there in the studios. And when I was introduced to these folks, none of them knew what BAI was. And that broke my heart. I said, how is it that these talented, active, engaged young folks, black and brown folks right there in the heart of Harlem, do not know what WBAI is? That broke my heart. I said, this is a crisis that's probably unfixable. I was thinking back then. And we tried to do stuff with BRIC too. And the reason why I raised those is because then you start hearing these naysayers talking about, oh, well, these are corporate institutions. They're linked to MNN. MNN's linked to Time Warner Cable. You're going to lose your autonomy. Well, first of all, WBAI lost its autonomy a long time ago. And if people don't want to face that, then they're sticking their head in the sand, or if not, a place much darker than the sand, right? And I think we lost the autonomy to the Empire State Building and its lawyers. We lost the autonomy to the fact that we don't have any physical space to produce radio. We lost our autonomy to these 6-7 week fund drives with Gary Null's programming being the primary conduit of trying to raise money. we've lost the relevance, right? And so to talk about a partnership with MNN as a surrender of autonomy is completely psychotic. It's suicidal. And to act and talk about MNN as an institution that is corporate or that is tied to cable is failing to recognize the history that John referenced very lightly before, and that's that people fought and struggled to make sure that those spaces like MNN would be there in the community, because they didn't want to surrender these exclusive contracts, cable contracts, to corporate giants without letting the community be part of it, right? And that's a struggle that's not only here to New York, that's a struggle that's gone all over the world. The right to communication, the right for us to tell our own stories, right? And so MNN, we have a right to that space. We have a right to be in there, and we have a right to build BAI and try to build that connection and that partnership. And I just want to finish really quickly, because that's the way we have to take it. That's the way we have to take it, that it is our right? We're not asking for favors. We can't ask the local board and ask them for favors. We can't go to the national board and ask them for favors. No, this is not their toy to play around with, right? This is the community's toy. And people have died around the world struggling for that right. And I'll just end it with this. I've been spending a lot of time, you probably know I've done a lot of work in Colombia. And right now in Colombia, I just came back literally less than a week ago. And I've been working the last 6 or 8 months, I've been visiting a lot of community media experiences around the country. 7 or 8 in some of the most conflictive zones over the last 20 years of the conflict. And all of them, all those communities, you talk young people who are talking about the massacres in which they saw their families getting killed, where they saw their brothers getting shot at. They're talking about how the radio is a tool for their transformation of their communities, right? And in fact, if you look at point 2 of the peace accords that were signed between the government of Juan Manuel Santos and the FARC rebels in 2016 that are just slowly being implemented and that are very close to failing right now. Point 2, point 2, point 3, which is the second point of the peace accords, which focuses on political participation, has like a whole couple of pages focusing on community media and community radio. The people demanded that has to be a right. That communication is a right that we have. That's a matter of life and death. And I would say that it's a matter of life and death for us here in New York City, given Gaza, given the police shootings that we see on a daily basis, given the raids on from ICE and et cetera. So this is not something that we're asking favors for. We have every right to ask for it. So que viva WBAI Rising.
And it was mentioned, Lynne and I spent a lot of time together, and we went to a meeting, and to each other, the first thing I said is, gee, that kid can speak. And Lynne said to me, yes, and with passion. Who the person we were talking about was Mimi Rosenberg, another lawyer. She's much younger, and let's listen to that kid speak with passion about BAI. Mimi.
The difference between BAI and Rachel Maddow is we can talk about the fact that there were 15 people who were just gunned down, who were unarmed in Gaza. They can't. We can talk about the fact that we knew there would be an autopsy report where Stephen Clark, out of the 20 fired bullets that took his life, 8 were in his back. What does that say? We are not MSNBC. We are a unique brand. And it's not just because we talk about those things, but what's the critical difference? And that's why Lynne was involved in BAI before she was martyred by the state for her work, because she understood that for any of our causes and issues, we must be media activists to propel them forward. And the critical issue is not just reportage, not to sit there and report, even if we report things that most other stations won't. It's to drum up support for activism, to inform us so we can become better agents for social change. It's an activist forum. It's a forum that understands that if you want to, go and must go to the demonstration prepared by the International Action Center and a lot of others. And if you want to get Sister Lynne out of jail, and if you want to get all political prisoners out, BAI is an activist venue. But all right, so what about it? We're dangerous. And who are we dangerous to? Oh, we're dangerous to the state. But we're dangerous, I'm sorry, to the social democrats who are effectively running the network at this point. Because you got to say, why is this happening? It is a coup. Is it a coup of the deep state? They're probably there somewhere. Haven't outed them yet. But they're the agents provocateurs that act for the deep state. We are in a second coup. We are in a second coup. WBAI is not the albatross. It's the cash cow. It's the station that has had the Sister Lynnes on for all these years, and the Sister Bettys, and the Ralphs, and the Saras, and the Out FMs, and the revolutionary cultural icons, which my sister Joyce Jones brings to the airwaves. So, wait a minute. What's going on? What's going on? How do you understand this? Oh, wait a minute. Let me see. Bill Crozier, who's Bill Crozier? Well, he was an interim executive director who wanted the network to go into bankruptcy. He was largely responsible for advocating for our next current executive interim director, Tom Livingston. Who's Tom Livingston? Well, he runs a consultancy with his son. What's the point of the consultancy? It is there it's a headhunter. It's a headhunter for essentially social democratic liberal media. So they come from the ilk that helped broker the deal for NYC, that took NYC away and essentially turned it into a multi-megabuck institution now that is essentially corporatist in nature. That's what they do, and he is here to assure within the next months that the full plan will be worked out and the network will be unrecognizable. And who's the thorn in the side? Who's the opposition? It's WBAI, make no mistake about it. Two reasons. One, a very practical reason. We hold the commercial license. We've got the money. The other reason is because we are by far the pivotal, the fulcrum for activism, for militancy, for advocacy for people. You get information to use it to become better social change agents. All right, so let's just continue. So where are we at right now? Tom Livingston comes in and he goes to the Empire State Realty Trust, which is where our antenna is housed. And we already have an entry of a judgment of $1.8 million. And he says to them, what kind of a deal can we work out here? And they say, we'll let you out of your contract, which goes till 2020, if you pay us effectively between $3 and $5 million. Now, the $3 and $5 million, $300,000 of which is to restore the room to its original grandeur from 50 years ago that the antenna was housed in. But we don't have to get into the specifics. Just keep your eye on the prize and keep the number in mind. So from $3 to $5 million. Oh, wait a minute. A couple of minutes ago, we had a $1.8 million debt. That was bad enough. Why would somebody be negotiating that? But wait a minute. Partnership, kindred spirit, former deeply immersed and involved person in the politics of Haiti, which he brought to WBAI, a former executive director, Dan Coughlin, who is now in M&N, and wants to form a partnership with us. They're willing to put up $2 million up front. It won't pay off the $1.8 million debt, but it will be used to leverage the end of that debt or to build more money. And on top of the $2 million, what would we get? We would get a studio. We would get a studio with TV. We would become visual. We would get the multiple platforms. We would get the podcast. We would get a board that's bigger than the size of this lectern to be able to broadcast from. And we would have the youth programs that have been set up there to train people in the technology to bring to what is sometimes the alta cacta facade. The old guys, if you will. Hey, I can't help but think, right, it's Passover tonight and we got 15 dead in Gaza? Am I going to miss something about MSNBC talking about, well, forget it. In envy, we are dangerous because we do dare to struggle and we do dare to win. We are dangerous, but there's so much to tie together. Just, do I have to stand in front of this? I don't want to stand in front of this. I don't want to stand. Because you are the network. It's always been about you. You are the voice. You are the media activists and must be even more so to preserve the issues and the causes that you fight for. And there is absolutely no form of social media, TV, or anything else, even at this juncture, that has the consistency of the voice and the persistency that BAI has. So what do? We're rising. We take it and we keep it. What do? Yes, there's a battle against the social democrats. What do they want to do? Why would they turn down $2 million, a new studio, multiple platforms to broadcast, TV, youth involvement? Why? Why? Because the rest of the network is in dire straits economically. There's no business plan, and you already said it. They want the money. We hold the commercial license. Now, with the debts that are being negotiated, which is in the millions of dollars, there is nothing to back it up. There is nothing to back it up. $10 million of paper real estate is not collateral for anything. But our commercial license is to swap or sell. And the route we're on now, and it is a quiet coup, is towards absolute bankruptcy. And what will happen within the next 18 months? They will come in and they will take us, not the albatross, the cash cow, BAI, and they will sell or swap us to buttress up the rest of the network, which has a whole different kind of social democratic philosophy. And I'm not saying there's no important or left or progressive programming on the other stations. Definitely there is. But guess what? They're in that fight as well. Here's the rub. The bottom line is, why do we need a partnership? Politically, we need a partnership because progressives need to relate and ally together and stop being siloized. Because they are coming for us. They are coming for us. They picked off our immigrant sisters and brothers. They have picked off our political prisoners. They have picked off the community members who are incarcerated at ever greater rates. They have picked off our housing, causing more people than ever before since the Depression to be in the homeless shelter system. Screw you, de Blasio. Don't tell me about these things. They will come for the resistors. They will come for the advocates. They will come for the leftists who abhor these things. This is a fight that makes it imperative for like-minded people to band together to form that movement that we need to begin to critically look at who holds state power. Because until we do that, we don't win freedom for the political prisoners. We don't win housing. We don't win jobs. We can't combat the fascist trappings of government. government that are presently in the White House and in Washington. So, BAI has a role to play. And it can be sidetracked and diverted, and it can be sold by the Social Democrats. So one, we need a partnership. We need MNN. And we need to relate to other media that's part of that to form a cohesive voice of resistance. Two, we damn well need their management skills and money right now, and it's right there and it's up front. We don't need no stinking loans which we can't pay back, and which, what will those loans lead to? Debt, bankruptcy, swapping. We are the real collateral for those loans they can't pay back. Now, why would they want to get rid of BAI? Because I maintain that we have a social democratic administration in the form of, from Bill Crozier and members of the board to the Tom Livingstons, all of whom are tied in with the loan companies. We can do a nice little family tree if you wanted to pick them out. They are the ones who helped broker the deal that took NYC out of the public venue and put it into essentially privacy with a distinct social democratic message. So I can't see Betty over there, but I'll bet I'm going to get that cowbell in a minute. And there are too many other important things for people to say, but please understand, this is a battle against social democracy for left community voices. We don't determine the voices. The community has always been responsible. The people who were the programs there, by and large, came. They percolated up from the community. And they're there as vehicles, as receptors to radiate out the voices of social activism. It's not about me. It's about the Saras. It's not about Joyce. It's about the people that she puts on, who are cultural icons, who have been iconoclasts and bringing revolutionary sentiment and a voice of the people, and on, and the Ken Nashes and the Bob Lederers and the John Rileys who are here, and the Michael Haskins and the Mario Murillos and the Valerie Van Islas, and tribute to my colleagues who are here, and stay with the struggle. BAI is an activist entity. You must be involved in WBAI Rising because you care about issues, and every one of those issues needs a solid, reliable media stream to radiate out the voices of the community. What did Bernard said? We fired the community, bring the community back in. Take advantage of support like you never have before, because we will be sold or swapped if we continue the way we are. We must fight Pacifica National Authority, its governance structure, its board, the local station board members who capitulate to that, who will put us into bankruptcy, necessitate a swap or a sale of our precious license, and a 60-year-old revolutionary institution, a revolutionary institution for change, will be lost. We have everything to win. Ken always says, I say, we have nothing to lose but our change. And then my good friend and co-host on Building Bridges, Ken Nash, says, yes. What do you say, Ken? We have a world to win. It's called right now MNN. We want that partnership. It will take care of us, give us the opportunity to rebuild, bring all those young people back in, so I don't have to sit there and say, my God, why isn't that 11-year-old, that sweet, wonderful 11-year-old who spoke in Washington, D.C., saying, I understand gun violence, but what about the gun violence against my sisters and brothers of color? Where have you been, and where will you be as they continue to get gunned down? I want her to be with us and to have the vehicle so that we don't need an 11-year-old to get up and tear her heart out with such profundity. BAI Rising, we will, and we'll do it in a partnership with Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And you got to tell management that. You got to say it. You got to work with us. We got to demonstrate. We got to do legal action. all of it, and there's a hell of a lot more, but it is a social democratic coup that sees us as the sacrificial lamb and the cash cow. Are we going to let it happen? Oh, come on. Are we going to let it happen? All right. Thank you.
So the question tonight, again and again coming through, is WBAI can and will continue with a vision. And if it has a vision, and it has a concrete way of moving forward. So that's what WBAI Rising is about. That's what we're talking about with Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And next up, I want to introduce Rachel Barr, who's going to talk about current management and the gag rule. And Rachel is both former employee at WBAI, former producer, and a 45-year listener at BAI.
As Sara said, I've been listening to the station for 45 years. My mother put WBAI in her will, but she became ill when the change happened in the station in terms of the programming, and she took BAI out of her will, as per her instructions to me. The management is aware of that, and so is the new temporary Pacifica executive director. I also worked at BAI, thanks to Valerie Van Isler for giving me that opportunity, and I helped produce many shows. I am deeply, deeply concerned about the fact that the general manager, or no, the program director, program manager, whatever the title is, would not let a listener from the community do a show revolving around public education. The mayor of the city just closed 5 schools yesterday. In case you didn't hear about it on WBAI, just wanted to make sure that news got to people. I got it on Facebook. I also am working with the new chancellor because he has called out to the public for suggestions. The new chancellor left children behind in Houston, and he's coming here now to leave these children behind. I just wanted to talk about the gag rule in terms of education. I received an email that was forwarded to me from one of the producers at WBAI, from Tony Bates, that producers are not allowed to talk about any of this, M&N, any of this. And I sent an email to the new executive director, and as well to Tony, and as well to Bertolt, who is the general manager, after the last report to the listener, in which Tony Bates treated both Ralph Poynter and Stamahili Mapp disrespectfully, in a racist manner, and unprofessionally. And on their behalf, I apologize. But I wanted the new exec to know that after Tony Bates heard that it was Ralph Poynter calling, and it was the first call, and he got this meeting in on the air, first he started saying, "Hi, my brother," and then when he talked about M&M, et cetera, he cut the brother off. So it concerns me as an educator and as a listener and as a monetary supporter, which I no longer can do in good conscience, that the listeners are not getting their education because we have some very bad programming on the air, and because producers are not allowed to practice freedom of speech. And they have no right to inflict that on us as listeners or producers, because that's part of the First Amendment, and it's part of also the Trump thing, where everyone with a different idea than the guy in the White House is being silenced, even the so-called leftists. And we have to speak out against that. So my time is up, but your time has just begun. SaveBAI.org.
There are a lot of initials being used tonight. We know what WBAI stands for, right? In terms of community radio, resistance, struggle, whether it's schools, U.S. wars, Palestine, Black Lives Matter, ICE raids, 5 schools being closed. I just learned. We know MNN here, Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I asked our next speaker to please explain PSOA. What's that mean? So, actually, whenever over many years I want to get kind of an update in short form, call Bob Lederer, because he's pretty good at kind of giving a sum up. I'll say, well, after all that, so where are we at? Bob can kind of tell you where are we at right now. Quick summary. So, Bob Lederer's points are frequently asked questions, and I think we can rely on him to really give us a good, short summary. Bob is a co-producer of Health Action and Out FM. He's a former member of the local station board and Pacifica National Board. He's a longtime queer activist who organized for years with ACT UP and years with many, many other struggles. So please join me in welcoming Bob Lederer.
I must say it is always a great honor to be on any stage to honor the memory of our beloved Lynne Stewart. Lynne was and will always be an icon to me and a role model for the role that a radical white person who wants radical social change needs to play, which is to constantly be building solidarity with the struggles of people of color and people of what used to be called the third world at home and abroad, in addition to, and manifested through her legal skills, but also through her political skills. And that's something that I will always cherish. Plus the fact, on top of all of that, that she was always, as a conscious straight person, in solidarity with those of us in the queer community and our rights and our struggles for liberation. So, thank you. Well, first I'll explain, as Sara asked, to simply say what is a PSOA, a Public Service Operating Agreement. Okay, what that is it's an actual category defined in regulation by the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, that allows a radio station or a television station that is licensed by the FCC to operate to kind of subcontract the management of their station out to another entity. And in the case of, since we're a non-commercial station, WBAI, it would be another non-commercial entity that would operate the station for a fixed period of time. And there's various reasons that stations decide that they want to engage in that kind of arrangement, after which it reverts to the original owner, the licensee. And there's terms and conditions, and it's an agreement. It's a negotiated agreement. And so, as we'll get to in a minute, the people who are putting out all the fears and boogie men and boogie women about what this would mean are never acknowledging that what it would mean is subject to what's agreed to by both sides. It's not an ultimatum delivered to Pacifica by Manhattan Neighborhood Network saying, these are the terms, take it or leave it. It's a negotiation. So that's the first thing. What I want to get into is both the legitimate questions that people have raised, because whenever you have a new paradigm, a radical paradigm shift, as what we're proposing with this partnership, you're going to have two things happen. One is that a lot of people are going to be fearful and have a lot of questions and concerns that are all legitimate. And the other is that those forces that Mimi and others talked about very eloquently earlier, who are threatened by this kind of change, who want to defend the status quo, who don't want the radical voices and the community voices to continue to have an uncensored voice over the airwaves, are going to put out a campaign of defamation and lies. And so both dynamics are happening right as we speak. And so I want to address both the sincere questions and concerns that have been raised and the outrageous lies. Let me start with the latter. The first lie that's being put out is that this is merely the first step to a sale of WBAI to M&M. Well, that's ridiculous on several levels. The so-called evidence for this is that that people who've looked into the history of these types of arrangements by other stations have said that often what ends up after a period of years with this PSOA, or the commercial version is called a local management agreement, it ends up with a sale. And that has happened on many occasions. But just because it has happened to others doesn't mean it will happen here, nor is anyone proposing that there be a sale. That's just, it's a non-issue. A sale requires two parties who are willing, one to sell and one to buy, and M&N has not even hinted or suggested that that's their interest, nor do they have the resources to purchase it anyway. I mean, WBAI is variously valued at this point, if it were horrifically to be put on the open market, to be worth anywhere from $40 to $50 million. So that's not a real thing. The other lie is the idea that that signing an agreement with M&N to become a role in operating station is going to hand it over to the corporate forces of the cable TV industry. And as was mentioned earlier, but I want to emphasize this and make it crystal clear, not only is there zero history in the 25 years of M&N's existence of any interference by these cable companies, but in fact, it is prohibited by New York State regulation, part of that hard-fought system of rules that community activists demanded to be put in place back in the late 80s, which is that there be bandwidth set aside for community organizations through a nonprofit, which is what M&N is, that has its own independent board, that none of the cable companies have any role in that board, that they have an uncensored vehicle to elevate community voices. And so that's absolutely clear, that this is not, that people, this is a very clever argument because it preys on the common understanding that where there is corporate money, there is corporate control. And that is true in the rest of the media, okay? We know about corporate advertising. It's why Pacifica has adamantly refused to take what NPR stations like WNYC masquerade as quote-unquote corporate underwriting, which is not advertising, when of course it is advertising, and that's why they can't take the really hard-hitting stands against some of these outrageous corporate practices. But that's not this model, okay? This is not like if they're pissed off by the programming this year, then maybe they'll withhold their grant next year. This is a legally contractual agreement that they must provide the funding every year. So that's a lot. Now, as far as some of the legitimate concerns, definitely there's the question about who makes the decisions over programming. Now, the head of M&N, who, as Mimi said, is the former head of Pacifica, Dan Coughlin, a long history of leftist activism and journalism. But it's still a fair question whether it's him or someone else who would be at the head of the organization. How would they just make all the decisions, and would they take off the air programs that are very important to communities and struggles? And first of all, he's made that clear that that's not his intention in the least. He wants to strengthen the programming, and he wants M&N to invest resources that were stripped away when 3/4 of the paid staff, for instance, was laid off 4 years ago, to start to restore some of those funds so that programs have the producer support and the technical support they need to do really quality programming that will bring back the audiences that have fled WBAI in the last few years. But second of all, under a PSOA, the organization that holds that power cannot just do anything they want. And I want to read you from the words of an expert on this subject, an attorney who specializes in FCC law, who was brought in by the Pacifica National Board 4 years ago when they were actually open-minded and considering the possibility of doing this. Okay, and they put out, as was said before, a call for proposals, and that's the call that M&N responded to. And so she was willing to submit to about 6 or 8 hours of public questioning about what would a PSOA mean for WBAI. And on the question of programming responsibility and decision-making, she said the following: the licensee, which in this case is Pacifica, has to approve any major programming change. So if there's a format change, the licensee had better approve it. The FCC also allows the licensee to preempt any of the programs, if they feel those programs do not meet the public interest, if there's something of more pressing public interest, like say the March for Our Lives last weekend that WBAI didn't deign to consider worthy of airtime, right? That if there was a more enlightened management at WBAI and Pacifica, they could say, no matter whether M&N, was playing the role with the PSOA or not, they could say, we're preempting you for 4 hours. It's not a suggestion. We're demanding that. We're insisting on that. She went on to say, and her name is Melody Virtue, and this is all archived online, the FCC has case law that says the licensee must exercise control over programming and personnel and finances. The way that's developed through case law is the licensee must have at least 2 full-time equivalent employees on site during normal business hours, one of whom must be a manager. So there you have the input on the scene for Pacifica into the decisions that are made there, and many more arrangements could be put into the contract so that there'd have to be consultation with representative councils and bodies of WBI producers and other mechanisms to make sure that there's a strong voice for the community in M&N's decision making. So that's definitely an issue that can be resolved, but ultimately it will never be fully resolved because, as Mario said, when has WBAI ever, certainly in recent years, had genuine autonomy? And so it will be a struggle. It's a huge struggle now, and it will continue to be a struggle if this PSOA is agreed to. That's the nature of struggling against unjust systems, is that it's a constant struggle. You can't rest on your laurels. So that's not something to be worried about. And I guess the final thing I just want to talk about is the importance of all of you getting involved in this fight, because I view this as just like every fight we've all been in, whether it's around police murder, whether it's around solidarity with the Palestinians, whether it's around LGBT rights or the survival of people with AIDS or any of the issues, housing rights. It takes pressure, it takes multiple tactics, it takes building a broad base, it takes bringing in a range of community organizations, and we have to use all those skill sets that we've all painstakingly developed over many years to this fight with the Pacifica National Board, which is being obstinate and backward, burying its head in the sand, and worse than that, as Mimi pointed out, heading this network and this station down a dangerous path toward bankruptcy and a signal swap, which will be the destruction of everything we've worked and fought for the last 60 years.